What kind of traditions, whew, that's a little loud. What kind of traditions do you have in your family? And do you have any that passed down the same sort of thing maybe that your parents did, that you did, or maybe your grandparents did? You know, I thought this past Christmas that we have a couple of goofy traditions we do at Christmas time. And I thought I was going to have to pass up on some of those because I wasn't able to go down, spend any time downstairs. That's where our television is down there, and we have some Christmas movies that we watch every Christmas Eve. We have to watch American Christmas Carol, and then we have to watch the old Christmas Carol from 1951 or something like that. And because of my surgery and that, I wasn't able to spend any time down in the basement where the TV was, so I thought, well, I guess I'm going to, first time in like 50 years, I'm not going to get to watch Ebenezer Scrooge. And Lenore brought the movie up and said, let's watch it on your laptop. I thought, oh, well, that's kind of nice. She's been watching Christmas movies like crazy. So there was looking at the little laptop sitting on the little table there. So we got to actually spend a little bit of time doing our little traditions there. But are traditions wrong? Sometimes. Sometimes traditions are wrong. Sometimes there's nothing wrong with a tradition. But sometimes traditions can get in the way of what's right. And the Pharisees were noted for letting the traditions that they had get in the way of what truth was. We have the law, which was in Genesis, Exodus, and Leviticus, the Pentateuch, all right, called it in the Torah. And the law was there, but they also had what was called the oral law. And it was a bunch of laws that were passed down exactly like that, were not written down. Actually, they eventually wrote them down, but it wasn't until 200 AD, like, you know, I wouldn't say recent history, but after Jesus came, all right, before they actually wrote them down. Before that, they passed these laws on down. They called them laws, all right? But they passed these down orally, and that was one of the jobs of the Pharisees, was they had to memorize these laws. They were actually in 6 different categories, all right? There's 6 different sections. There was laws on agriculture, laws on festivals, laws regarding women, laws regarding civil and criminal law, holy things, and ritual purity, all right? And they were kind of divided. There was these 6 little things. I want you to take your Bibles with me, if you will, and come with me to Matthew chapter 15. We spent some time there last week looking at the Canaanite woman, also called the Syrophoenician woman, if you look in the passage in Mark. But in Matthew chapter 15, verse number 2, the Pharisees came to, and the scribes came to Jesus, and they're accusing Jesus of allowing his disciples to do some things. Verse 2, it says, "Why do thy disciples transgress the tradition of the elders, for they wash not their hands when they eat bread?" It sounds like a good thing to do, doesn't it? How many wash their hands before they eat? How many think about it after they've already eaten? All right. Okay. Well, the truth of the matter is, this oral law of washing their hands before they eat has, going to shock you here, has absolutely nothing to do with hygiene. And for those of you that aren't sure, hygiene is not a tall girl. Okay, that is something different, all right? But it has nothing to do with hygiene. As a matter of fact, they didn't realize that washing your hands before that germs could cause sickness until about the time of the Civil War. And that's probably why there were so many people that died and disease was so rampant back in the Dark Ages, because they didn't realize what germs were, and they just, you know, whatever, and they did that. But this law, what they had for it was a symbolic ritual that demonstrated that people adhered to the laws, the oral laws. It was just kind of a proof text, as you might say, all right? Now, we're going to look a little more closely at the Pharisees in just a moment and in their traditions and how they held to these traditions. But I want to jump more to the end of the chapter first, and then we'll kind of come back to that, all right? So if you look at it, still in chapter 15, we're going to start in verse number 28, because it kind of picks up from last week. We talked about the Canaanite woman. Remember, she came to the Lord. Her daughter was grievously vexed with the devil, and there was some testing that was going on there, and she came as a Jew would come when she was not a Jew. And at any rate, Jesus turned that around, but look what happens here in verse 28. And Jesus answered and said unto her, O woman, great is thy faith. Be it unto thee even as thou wilt. And her daughter was made whole from that very hour. And Jesus departed from thence, and came nigh unto the Sea of Galilee, and went up into a mountain, and sat down there. And great multitudes came unto him, having with them those that were lame, blind, dumb, maimed, and many others, and cast them down at Jesus' feet, and he healed them. Insomuch that the multitude wondered when they saw the dumb to speak, and the maimed to be whole, and the lame to walk, and the blind to see, and they glorified the God of Israel. That little phrase there seems a little bit odd. They glorified the God of Israel. Why is it worded, they glorified the God of Israel? Well, we're going to look at a verse in Mark chapter 7 and verse 31. And if I can get Greg to pop that up on the screen for us, it says, and again departing from the coast of Tyre. This is the same situation that we are in, all right? And except it's the passage that's in Mark. And it says, and again departing from the coast of Tyre and Sidon, he came unto the Sea of Galilee through the midst of the coast of Decapolis, all right? And that's important to understand, all right? What they came to, looking for my daughter here, we're going to throw up a map on the screen here, and I'm just going to show you something here. This is the promised land. This is Israel, and we see down here, you can see, you know what? My red dot doesn't work on screen. So, we see down at the bottom we have the Dead Sea, and it's called the Dead Sea because nothing can live in it or around it. When we were there, it was amazing. It was just desolate all around. And I think I might have mentioned this to you once before. Walter told me before he went there, he said, make sure if you go into the Dead Sea, wear some water shoes because the bottom is very, very sharp. So I put on the water shoes, just doing like I ought to do. And I went and I walked around in there. And one of the other fellows that we kind of made friends with, he said, you ought to take those water shoes off and walk around because it'll make your feet so smooth. I said, okay. So I popped off my water shoes and I'm walking around there. And I'm thinking, this is a dumb idea. I like Walter's idea better. So what I did was I sat down in the water, not on the bottom, all right? I was in the water floating with my legs crossed like this, putting on the shoes. That's how buoyant the water is. It was a lot of fun, all right? But don't open your mouth while you're in that water because it is salty, salty. There's all kinds of minerals in that, all right? But anyway, that's the Dead Sea, all right? But you'll see up north of the Dead Sea, we can see where, actually, if you can look off, the one with this box around it, that's Jerusalem, and then we have Jericho, and we have Samaria in the green, and up near the top we have the Sea of Galilee, all right? Now, we're going to look at a little close-up of the Sea of Galilee, and we see there the Sea of Galilee, and it shows us some areas there, and you can see up in the top left there, you see where it says Tyre. That's where the Tyre and Sidon were, all right? And as it says that Jesus traveled, he just didn't go in a straight line down to the Sea of Galilee. It says there that he went around to Decapolis. So he went around the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee, and that's important to understand, all right? That's important to understand. Decapolis was originally a group of 10 Greco-Roman cities, all right? And these cities, it started with 10, and then some people say it went to 14, some people will say it went to 19, it doesn't matter. But they're called the Decapolis because originally it was 10, deca meaning 10. But these cities, all right, they were authorized to mint their own coins, all right? They ran their own courts. They were allowed to have their own armies. And typically these cities had no love for the Jews. You know why? This is Gentile territory. This is Gentile territory in the Decapolis where they were, all right? And why were these people so excited to see Jesus? Look what it says there. It says, and they glorified the God of Israel. And we'll get into numbers here in just a moment because it really, it flows down here. But one of the reasons I believe that there was so many that were there that heard that Jesus was there, even though typically these Gentiles really had no use for the Jews, There was a man. There was a man whom Jesus had done something for. If you look right, I can't, again, I was hoping my pointer would work, but it doesn't work on the screen there. There is a little city there called Gadara. And there was a man that we refer to as the maniac of Gadara. He was a man that was possessed with devils. And Jesus, if you remember the account, Jesus goes there and they meet him on the coast. And everybody stayed away from this guy, and Jesus healed him. Everybody was afraid of him because he could break chains. They would tackle him, they'd hold him down. And after that, the people came back, it says that he was sitting at Jesus' feet, listening to Jesus, and he was clothed and in his right mind. And what he wanted to do in his right mind was he wanted to get in the boat with Jesus. Wouldn't you love to get in the boat with Jesus? I know I would love to get in the boat with Jesus. And he wanted to go with Jesus, and Jesus says, no, you can't. You have to stay here and tell people what I've done for you. And we see in Mark chapter 9 and verse 25, it says that Jesus left, it says, and he departed and began to publish in Decapolis how great things Jesus had done for him, and all men did marvel. He did that in Decapolis, all right? And these people, I think that of all these people that were here, that it's very possible, and I can't prove this, all right? So if you want to say, Pastor Taylor, you're wrong, I don't think he was there, you might be just as right as I am saying that I think he was probably there. I think if he heard that Jesus, or at least if he heard that Jesus was going to be there, I think he'd have come and brought some people with him, all right? And there were many that were there, all right? Now, moving on, all right, we get to verse 32. And let's read on. We're going to read down from verse 32 down to the end of this chapter. And see something here. It says, then Jesus called his disciples unto him and said, I have compassion on the multitude. All these people that came bringing the dumb and the maimed and the blind and so forth, they came to him. He says, I have compassion on the multitude because they continue with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat, and I will not send them away fasting, lest they faint in the way. And the disciples say unto him, whence should we have so much bread in the wilderness as to fill so great a multitude? And Jesus saith unto them, how many loaves have ye? And they said, 7, and a few little fishes. And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground. And he took the 7 loaves and the fishes, and gave thanks, and brake them, and gave to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. And they did all eat, and were filled. And they took up of the broken meat that was left 7 baskets full. And they that did eat were 4,000 men, beside women and children. And he sent away the multitude, and took ship, and came into the coast of Magdala. We see here, we know the story of the feeding of the 5,000 when the little boy brings his lunch and he's got 5 loaves and 2 fishes. The big difference here, I was having a little game with Brother Greg this week, and I said, what's the difference between the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000? And you can't say 1,000, all right? That's out. The big difference is, and Greg brought some interesting differences, but he missed this one. The feeding of the 5,000 was predominantly Jews. The feeding of the 4,000 is predominantly Gentiles. And they're there, all right? We can see, my map's gone, all right? But that area where they were in Decapolis, it's Gentile territory where Jesus is. And these people are there saying they glorified the God of Israel, all right? Did Jesus love these Gentiles? Absolutely, he loved these Gentiles. We look, at the little previous passage, and at first glance, it kind of when the lady comes with her daughter that's vexed with this devil, we kind of think, well, Jesus is prejudiced against Gentiles. He's not prejudiced against Gentiles. All right. Bible tells us in Romans chapter 1 and verse 16. I'm actually going to look at that verse in a little bit, but it says that he came to the Jew first and also to the Gentiles, or also to the Greek. But we see here in verse 32, it says, and I have compassion on the multitude. He loved these people, all right? For God so loved what? The world. All right? That he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. All right? It was his idea to feed them. All right? And very similar to when he fed the 5,000, some critics of the Bible try to say, well, you know, that he made a mistake here, and you know, it's the same thing. It's not the same thing. All right? For one thing, there's 5,000 as opposed to 4,000. For another, he tells him, it's earlier in the year when he talks about the Jews, because he asks them to sit down on the grass. And here he tells them to sit down on the ground because it's later in the year and there isn't any. All right? And because it's kind of wilderness area. And because of where he is, he's talking to these Gentiles. All right? In the Jewish account, he was there for 1 day. With the Gentiles, they were there for 3 days. Whatever food they had was gone. All right? After 3 days. We see here that the miracle happened in Jesus' hands. He took the food, he broke the food, he handed it off to his disciples, and they distributed it, and so forth. And we see here that it tells us afterwards, he says, and they did all eat and were filled, and they took up the broken meat that was left, 7 baskets full. And we think, well, how many baskets full was it with the Jews? Anybody know? Anybody remember? It was 12 baskets. Well, I said, well, there's more leftovers. Not necessarily, okay? Not necessarily. They're both baskets, all right? But this word basket is the same word basket that's used, and I'll get Greg to pop the verse up there, in Acts chapter 9 and verse 25. Do you remember when Paul was trying to escape? It says, then the disciples took him by night and let him down by the wall in a basket. So in the feeding of the 5,000, they picked up 12 baskets. In the feeding of the 4,000, they picked up 7 baskets. All right? These ones would hold a person. These are big baskets. All right? So was there more leftovers? I don't know. Okay, we can't really tell one way or the other, but there's actually 2 different types of baskets that were used here. All right? But that's not really that important of a point. But my point here is this. These Gentiles stuck with Jesus for 3 days. All right? But not only that. Look at verse 31 one more time. It says, insomuch that the multitude wondered when they saw the dumb to speak, the maimed to be whole, the lame to walk, and the blind to see, and they glorified the God of Israel. When they saw these miracles, the miracles were there so that people would glorify God. We ought to glorify God. We ought to. When we see God do something, we ought to glorify God. When God speaks to us from his word, we ought to glorify God. These Gentiles were glorifying the God of Israel. That's why it says the God of Israel. He wasn't their God yet, okay? But they glorified the God of Israel. Take with your Bibles, if you will. I'm going to keep you in Matthew. Let's go to chapter 12, just back a couple of pages. We'll see the reaction, frequent reaction of the Jews to what Jesus was doing. In Matthew chapter 12, starting in verse 22, it says, then was brought unto him one possessed with the devil, blind and dumb. And he healed him, insomuch that the blind and the dumb both spake and saw, and all the people were amazed and said, is not this the son of David? But when the Pharisees heard it, they said, this fellow doth not cast out devils, but by Beelzebub, the prince of devils. Their reaction is not to glorify God. Their reaction is to say he hasn't got anything to do with God. They're saying this guy is associated with Satan. That's the exact opposite of what the Gentiles were saying. You know, we see here Jesus' reaction. The Syrophoenician woman, the Canaanite woman, all right? Jesus' reaction in Matthew chapter 15 and verse 28, it says, then Jesus answered and said unto her, O woman, great is thy faith, be it unto thee even as thou wilt. And her daughter was made whole from that very hour. The centurion, when Jesus healed the centurion servant, all right? And what the servant said, you know, I've had I have authority, and I know you have over authority. You don't have to bother coming to heal my servant. And you can do it from here. And Jesus healed him. And interestingly enough, Jesus healed the Syrophoenician woman, or the Canaanite woman, whichever way you want to say it, same lady. He healed her daughter without going there. He did the same with the centurion's servant, all right? And it says, and when Jesus heard it, I want you to take note of this word. When Jesus heard it, he marveled and said to them that followed, verily I say unto you, I have not found so great faith, no, not in Israel. He hadn't seen greater faith than these two Gentiles. Now, the centurion, I think, was on the west side of the river and was in Israel proper, but this other lady was not. She was up in Tyre, all right? But they're both Gentiles. In the Israelite cities, in Matthew chapter 11 and verse 20, it says, then began he to upbraid, talking about Jesus, the cities wherein most of his mighty works were done, because they repented not. Most of his mighty works were done there, but he repented. The people repented not. Jesus marveled at the faith of the Canaanite woman. Jesus marveled at the faith of the centurion. And in Mark chapter 6 and verse 6, it says that he marveled because of their unbelief. And he went round about the villages teaching. These Jews, all right, these Jews didn't believe what Jesus was doing. And it says there in the cities where he did most of his mighty works, they didn't believe what he was doing. Now, Jesus was promised, first of all, as I said earlier, to the Jews. All right? It tells us, and in Romans 1:16, I mentioned this verse earlier, it says, for I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. Why were the Gentiles glorifying God and God's chosen people who Jesus was promised to? All the way back in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, again in Genesis chapter 12 when he talked to Abraham, why were those promised people, why were they going and not accepting what Jesus did when the Gentiles said they were glorifying the God of Israel? I got a couple reasons for you. One of them is tradition. The other one is familiarity. Tradition, as we see, you still have your Bibles open to Matthew, flip over back to chapter 15. It says in verse 2 and verse 3, it says, why do the disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they wash not their hands when they eat bread. But he answered and said unto them, why do ye also transgress the commandment of God by your tradition? What he's saying is you're going against your traditions that you pass down are going against the direct commands of God that you have written there. And you're going against those things because their traditions, they were so steeped in their tradition that they were blind to the truth. They were blind to the truth. They had built a reputation with having all these things memorized and all their fancy phylacteries that they had on and all that other stuff, but they built a reputation that these guys, that they knew the answers. And they were respected by everyone for that. They didn't want to jeopardize that in any way. But they were stuck in their traditions. But also, we're going to look at some verses in a minute here where it was because of familiarity. Familiarity. Okay, I'm spitting that out here, all right? They didn't want anything different than what they already had. You know, they were comfortable in their blissful ignorance. Flip back to chapter 13 there in Matthew. Verse number 55. Here's an answer to when Jesus was doing some things. And the people said, is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother Mary, and his brethren James and Joseph and Simon and Judas? And his sisters, are they not all with us? Whence then hath this man these things? They're saying, he's just an ordinary guy. Isn't this the guy we know where he lived down the street, down the corner, and his father was a carpenter? And we know with all his brothers and sisters, there's nothing special about them. There's nothing special about Jesus. Jesus says to them, verse 57, and they were offended in him. But Jesus said unto them, a prophet is not without honor, save in his own country and in his own house. Being entrenched in familiarity is a dangerous, dangerous place to be. Just think, if you go to a restaurant and you always order the same thing. How many order the same thing? I order the same thing most of the time, all right? I'm entrenched in this as well, all right? And you miss out on something that's really good, you know? Or you miss out on something you're not going to like at all and you still have to pay for it. No. But you could miss out on something that's good. I had a perfect illustration of someone that was locked in on, this is the way I do this all the time. When I was working at the fire department, we had an accident right out front of the fire department. Somebody had blacked out and crossed over the line, smashed in, head-on collision, a whole big mess. Right there, like drive the truck, start up, stop, okay? And so I took my truck, and it was 4 lanes in front of the main hall there on Clarence Street. And I blocked off, I could only block off 3 of the lanes because the it's only so long, okay? So I pulled in there, I blocked off 3 lanes, and I took my pylons, big orange pylons, and I stacked them across the other lane, all right? So, what's that tell you, folks? The road is closed, right? City bus coming along. Up on the sidewalk, drove over my pylons, with his mirror, hit one of the light poles there, and I'm thinking, what are you doing? And I'm yelling at this bus driver, and he's, well, this is my route. This is the way I go. And there's a lady pulling a, oh, I'll go up on the sidewalk too. And I ran in front of her and said, what are you doing? Get out of here. Like, we're trying to block this, but entrenched in, this is what I'm familiar with. This is my route. I can't go around the block. But we get locked in as well. To something that is, this is just familiar. And I'm going to give you something that's very, very dangerous to be familiar with. You know what's very, very dangerous to be familiar with? The gospel. It is very, very dangerous to be familiar with the gospel. I want you to listen how I wrote this, all right? An unsaved person may have heard it so many times that it sounds like Charlie Brown's teacher. It means nothing. It doesn't apply to them. It isn't real. That's an unsaved person. They've heard it so many times that it just water off a duck's back. But now let me read it slightly different. A saved person may have heard it so many times that it sounds like Charlie Brown's teacher. It means nothing. It doesn't apply to them. It isn't real. The only word different is saved and unsaved. It's familiarity. And the reality of hell becomes just words. Because we're so far away from the day where we got on our knees and said, God, forgive me. And we've heard it so many times preached. We've read it so many times in the Bible that, you know what, it doesn't mean anything anymore. The preacher is just Charlie Brown's teacher. Means nothing. It's not real. We get comfortable with us 4, no more. That's good. It's all we have. We're fine. We can play church. We can just, we're good. The urgency isn't urgent anymore. It's not urgent. There will always be another tomorrow. Working in the fire department, I got to see some very brutal things. And probably of the first 20 dead people that I had to deal with, pulling them out of car accidents, pulling them out of machinery, pulling them out of whatever, I think every single one of the first 20 were under the age of 25. They all thought they had a tomorrow. I come to a car accident and pull some people out of that car accident. I remember one we had out by, used to be called the Blue Haven, now it's called the Urban Cottage or something out on Highway 2, and I don't know why. We had many accidents in this one spot. I have no idea why. It's just a little dip in the road. 2 cars hit. It was foggy. Transport truck went through the middle after it didn't see them and cleaned them both up. I don't know if they lived the first accident. They certainly didn't live through the second accident. And I got there as I'm pulling this person out, I'm thinking, where are you? Where are you right now? You met God 10 minutes ago before we got here. Where are you? They thought they had a tomorrow. Last year, everyone in this room had 365 tomorrows, and they all came true. And this year, we've got 365 more, and maybe for all of us, maybe they'll all come again. But for others, those tomorrows will not come. They will not come. The fact is, I did a little Google search, and I don't know if you can trust everything you find on the internet. I know you can't, but at any rate, I found this in a couple of spots. They say every minute about 110 people die on the planet. That's almost 2 people every second. You breathe in, 2 people just died. 2 more people just died. Did someone tell them about the gospel? Or was the gospel, it doesn't matter anymore? We're not urgent. It's not urgent. If you're here this morning and you've heard the gospel, everyone in this room has heard the gospel. I've preached it many times. You've heard the gospel many times, but if you have never accepted Christ as your personal Savior, don't let this just be a rom again. You don't know if you have tomorrow. You do not know. The youngest little body I pulled out of a fire was 2. Now that 2-year-old, I believe, is in heaven. And his 3 brothers and sisters, they maxed out at 8. And his mom. They didn't have it tomorrow. Smoke detector sitting on the kitchen counter with no battery in it because they pulled the battery out to put in a remote for their TV. That's why you can't put 9-volt batteries in remotes anymore for your TV, in case you were wondering why you always have to use AA's. It's so they can't take it out of your smoke detector. But you know what? They didn't have it tomorrow. You may not have it tomorrow. If you do not know Jesus as your Savior, don't leave this place without talking to somebody. Do not leave this place without talking to somebody. You have no idea. God says it's appointed unto man once to die, and after that's a judgment. Don't know when that is. But if you do know Christ as your Savior, beg God for that urgency to come back. I can pretty much guarantee, or at least a lot of people, the day after you got saved, you were telling somebody else that they need to get saved because it was urgent. Is it still as urgent today? Is it still as urgent today? We got a whole rack of tracts out here in the entryway. Grab some of these tracts on your way out of here. I would love to have to budget $5,000 or $10,000 a year for tracts that we're handing out in the city. That would be awesome if we went through that many. But we're not going through that many right now. Grab some tracts. Talk to your friends. Talk to your neighbors. Talk to your coworkers. They may not have an eternity, or they may not have rather a tomorrow, but eternity, folks, is a long time. And what are we doing? What are we doing as individuals to that 100,000 people outside these doors? Do we care enough? Is it urgent enough? Is it real enough? Or were we so familiar with it? Just like the Jews were so familiar with who Jesus was. He's the kid who is just the son of Joseph. He can't be anything special. He's just, there's his brothers, there's his sister, there's his mom, Mary. What is he? He's no different than we are. He's God. That's who he is. Let's give up on familiarity, folks. And let's get out there and let's tell some folks they need to get saved. Precious Father, thank you for your goodness. Thank you for your